There are an indefinite number of stories about the future. Our purpose is to tell those that matter.
So last year at SPI, I told a story about the future. I took the audience forward on a journey 20 years into the future as the CEO of Tomorrow Power and Light, a fictitious electric utility operating in the year 2031. Last year, I played out one possible scenario for what the future of solar power could look like here in the US. The main takeaway was that under the right circumstances, it would be feasible for an electric utility 20 years in the future to obtain 30% of its electric power from solar energy, while maintaining a healthy business, a healthy grid, and a healthy relationship with the solar industry. Over the past year, I've given that speech again multiple times to utility audiences across the country, and I want you to know something. I want you to know that the utility industry did not react as if I were presenting some crazy fantasy land scenario. In fact, most of the utilities who have heard me give that speech not only believe the scenario could easily be reality 20 years from now, they are, in fact, quite optimistic that it will happen. But scenarios are simply constructed stories about the future. Every scenario represents a different but plausible outcome. What I laid out last year is just one of those many different possible scenarios. Today, I'd like to take you on a journey to three alternative versions of the future, along three possible paths that solar might take. My objective today is to show you how different forces can impact which of these futures become reality. In my first, but hopefully very unlikely scenario, growth of solar markets will have stalled completely. Most of us in this room will have found a new career in a different industry, unfortunately. Solar energy will have remained a fringe player, representing less than 2% of the overall electricity portfolio. In my second scenario, we'll probably all be sitting here, literally, in the SPI 2032 general session, struggling with many of the same old issues that the solar industry has been facing since the 1970s. Solar will have continued to grow, but at a pace that will have only gotten it to somewhere between 5 and 10% of the electricity mix. But in my third scenario, this is the one you're going to like. This is the one where everyone in this room will be loving life, walking, driving up and down streets across America, and seeing solar on roofs, parking structures, industrial sites, basically everywhere you look. Solar will truly be living up to its potential and will provide as much as 30% of the nation's electricity needs. As I walked out onto the stage this morning, you heard a quote from Lawrence Wilkinson, who is a pioneer of the scenario planning technique and author of numerous books and papers on the subject. His strategies have been widely used by some of the world's largest corporations. In an article for Wired magazine, Lawrence wrote, "We look out into the future, trying our best to make wise decisions, only to find ourselves staring into the teeth of ferocious and widespread uncertainties." Rather than getting overwhelmed by those uncertainties, it's valuable for us to take a step back and examine the various potential outcomes of those uncertainties. So today, I'd like to talk about 4 areas of uncertainty that I believe will factor heavily into the future of solar energy: social dynamics, political issues, technological issues, and economic issues. The first, social dynamics, has played a big role in the success of solar to date, with many people adopting, as we all know, solar for reasons other than purely economic ones. But even as solar becomes more and more affordable, social dynamics will remain important. For example, how society reacts to and embraces what I'll refer to as the energy information age fits into this category. Earlier this year, the Green Button Initiative was launched, with the common sense idea that electricity customers should be able to securely download their easy-to-understand energy usage information. Armed with this kind of information, customers can use a growing array of new web and smartphone tools to make informed energy decisions. Customers can even use fun and innovative apps to compete against their social media friends to save energy and lower their carbon emissions. But the products offered by many of the companies who make the software and applications relevant to Green Button don't yet fully incorporate functionality today for customers who've already gone solar. So what does this mean? This means the solar industry really has to take a step back and make the time to engage in these types of forward-looking initiatives and participate in partnerships with providers of new technologies to ensure that customers participating in this new energy information age don't unintentionally leave solar behind or scrambling to catch up. Now on to the second area of uncertainty, political issues. You'll hear from Roan shortly about the really ugly nature of solar in today's political landscape leading up to the election. While we all aspire to a unified national strategy and vision for solar, today's political reality makes that a really daunting challenge. But on the flip side, solar can play a very critical role in meeting the needs of state and local governments. So today, what I ask all of you is, what can each of us do to help gain traction at that level of government? You'll also hear from Roan about efforts to modify net metering as we know it today. It is true, let's be real, it is true that utilities generally are not in favor of net metering, largely because they recognize its limitations. Net metering is a great policy for today in many cases, and it's a great policy for the less than 2% scenario that none of us want to see be the reality of 20 years from now. And with modest accommodation, it is a reasonably workable policy up to a point. But it's not a policy that's going to get us to a 30% solar scenario here in the US. If anywhere near 30% of electric customers were to net meter under today's regulatory framework and utility rate structures, utilities could not reliably and cost-effectively build or maintain the infrastructure that solar energy relies upon. I know what many of you are thinking. Many of you are thinking, is it really so bad if utilities disappear? Well, without widespread deployment of storage, who would provide power at times when solar electricity wasn't being generated? Who would balance customers' imports and exports of power? What would be the impact on customers who could not go solar? And so what I ask is, isn't it in the best interest of everyone, which includes both the utility industry and the solar industry, to invest the time and effort today to develop a regulatory structure that allows for a new, long-term, sustainable utility solar business or utility business model? Thank you. So we're talking about a business model that encourages customers capable of installing solar to do so, one which rewards utilities to innovate and create a platform in which solar is fully leveraged for its strengths, and one which ensures that the costs and benefits are fairly distributed. What if, let's say, for example, over the next decade, complete nationwide utility deregulation were to occur, resulting in plug-and-play utilities that were designed to welcome and encourage home and business owners to plug their own electricity generators into the grid? What if utilities were no longer in the business of, losing my mic here, sorry, in the business of selling power to customers, but rather made money by providing access to the grid and providing the ancillary services necessary to maintain a functioning and reliable energy network? This discussion leads us nicely into the third area of uncertainty, technological issues. Most of the important technological issues relate to how solar energy will integrate with and add value to the grid. Storage, advanced inverters, performance monitoring and metering equipment, forecasting software, these are all things that fall into that category. Imagine for a moment that, as I said earlier, nationwide utility deregulation does occur, and utilities are playing in the future the new role I described as a network operator. What if utilities in that situation offered new technological options, like a DC-ready utility service interface for each customer? What if utilities built locally centralized inverters and energy storage into the grid at the community level so that each PV system didn't require its own? These are just a couple of examples of what could be technological components of a new age grid that would complement a whole new role for utilities of the future while making it easier and more cost-effective to add substantially more solar. The fourth uncertainty is economic issues. One of those is the future of fuel prices over the long term. Everybody knows the price of natural gas today is very low, but looking back just to 2008, it was 4 times its current cost. Coal is plentiful and relatively inexpensive today, but is one of the major energy sources in developing countries like China and India. Eventually, that demand and any potential future major action on carbon regulation will cause the price to go up. For many years, conventional generation has taken advantage of subsidies. But the costs of most of those subsidies have been socialized through taxes, whereas today, the costs for solar incentives are often borne by utility ratepayers, which significantly complicates the equation. So looking into the future, there are big uncertainties around what will happen to all types of energy subsidies, both for conventional and alternative sources of generation. And how tax reform might impact the cost of all energy resources is another big unknown. Another economic angle to take a look at returns us to the topic of business models. I already described one possible scenario where utilities might no longer provide power, but instead serve as a grid network operator. Turning our attention to Italy actually provides a glimpse into a completely different but equally plausible alternative. Enel is the third largest utility in Europe, and it has created a franchising network of solar installers. Each of these solar installer franchisees receives an exclusive development area within Enel's service territory, along with an expansive business support network from the utility. So Enel is able to benefit from collecting a franchise fee and playing a role in the development of distributed PV within its service territory, while the local solar installers are provided the resources they need to truly thrive. Today, there's over 750 installer franchisees in the Enel network, so it's a really interesting business model to think about. I've spent the past few minutes talking about a variety of uncertainties that could take varying paths that would impact the future. But most of these uncertainties actually can be boiled down into two overarching categories. The first is the level of support that solar energy will receive in the future. And the second is the level of partnership that will occur between players in the energy space. If nothing changes and we continue with the status quo, sorry to say it's very likely we could be on the path to one of the less than desirable scenarios. Today, solar energy, unfortunately, is a very highly politicized issue. The momentum for domestic price on carbon has stalled. Home and business owners just still don't quite yet understand or fully embrace solar energy. So basically, today, we have no widespread comprehensive support. On the other axis, the utility and solar industries continue to be at odds rather than focusing on finding win-win solutions. Solar companies and vendors of technologies that will be critical to the long-term success of solar are not yet fully integrating their visions and products. Basically, there's no widespread culture of partnership either. In order to achieve the 30% solar scenario, or one equally or even more appealing, we must strive towards a future that has substantial comprehensive support for solar energy, that includes sound federal, state, and local energy policies and regulation, and increased public awareness and acceptance. Making this scenario a reality also requires a strong partnership culture, where collaboration exists between the solar industry and providers of other related technologies, and between electric utilities and solar installers. I'm sure last week many of you watched from your couch as Bill Clinton spoke on the theme of cooperation during his DNC speech. And we will all have the honor of hearing from him in person on this issue later this week. And when it comes to the future of solar energy, I could not agree more with Bill Clinton on the importance of cooperation and collaboration. I hope in the year 2032, we are all indeed still sitting here in the SPI general session, but that we have hundreds of thousands of colleagues here with us, and that we are contemplating a whole new set of topics resulting from the fact that solar has reached 30% of the nation's electricity portfolio. And I hope as I've talked about various uncertainties that could impact the future, you've come to realize that while some of them are out of your control, others you can indeed influence. As President Clinton says, the future is not an inheritance, it is an opportunity and an obligation. Thank you.